So, I borrowed our power up. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time today or who are just a little bit forgetful, we are week 3 in our series on prayer. So, Cyfres Weddi, how to pray. We are basing our teaching and in our small groups on the Pete Greig book of the same name. And he, in turn, is using the acronym PRAY, which is pause, rejoice, ask, and yield. So last week, Anna took us through Oedi, to pause. This week, I am talking about Llawenhewch, rejoice. And we get to Gofyn. Like, that's my favourite week. That's the asking week. Like, hang on, guys, you'll get to ask God. And then we come to the end with ildio, yield. So that's where we are. And so the series is based around those 4 things. In turn, it's also based on the Lord's Prayer, that prayer that Jesus gave us, which starts, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." And so that's where we are starting this morning. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. And actually, the Bible, the Welsh translation that we use, Bible, it actually translates that as "we want your name to be honoured," I think. And I quite like that translation. We want your name to be honoured. So we're going to unpick who God is a little bit, around being Father and some of the ways that we can rejoice. But I'm wondering how many of you managed to see the planets in alignment in January? How many of you managed to see them? A couple of tentative hands. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to quote them. It's okay. We saw about three or four. We kept losing Venus for some reason or other. Phil was like, "It's over there somewhere." It's gone down. It's gone down. I'm like, "Sorry, okay." But I don't know what you were like when you saw the planets and when you look up at that starry sky, or when you see the full moon, or if anybody was up early enough this morning, the sunrise was quite impressive. What do you feel? What do you think? Chances are you have a sense of awe, a sense of something bigger than yourself, a sense that just causes, even those that maybe don't acknowledge God as creator or even don't know God, there's something outside of yourself, and there's something that rises up in a place of awe and, awe, really. I suspect that nobody ever looks at a full moon and says, "Yeah, aren't I wonderful? Aren't I great? Yeah, I'm pretty cool." That is not the time where we think about ourselves, is it? That is a time of awe, and we're hardwired to worship. We're hardwired for adoration. We're hardwired, created to worship something other than ourselves. Worship is what God designed you to do. But I wonder how many of you know that it's not just the church that worships. It's not just the church that worship. Worship is a universal human experience. We all worship something. Even those that are not at a church or in a religious gathering worship. And I love these 2 pictures. The first one is a group of female athletes. I don't know. I don't do sport, sorry. But I'm thinking, I don't know, is it football? It's football. Who are they? Oh, big net behind, a bit of a clue. Okay, so these women, they are rejoicing. They are celebrating. And the thing is, they've probably, I don't know, maybe they've scored a goal, maybe they've won a cup, maybe maybe they've won something. And they're going to have to do it again the next week, aren't they? It's they can't just sort of settle in that place. They're going to have to play again, either the next week or straight away. But they are rejoicing. And then this next one is a pop concert. It isn't a Christian gathering. It is a pop concert. People are rejoicing at that pop concert. And if you look, what is it that ties those two things together? What is happening with the hands? Oh, they are up. The hands are up because worship is a universal human experience. And when we connect with something outside of ourselves, something that connects with us emotionally and in our heads and in our bodies, there's a response. There's a response physical. There is a physical response. And I just thought that was really interesting. And I sometimes think that we could learn something about rejoicing from looking at how people who are not in church worship. So I'm going to start with Our Father. I'm Tad, Father. I mean, I have to tell you, this is my favourite subject, so I'm going to try and really hold back a little bit, because I could talk about God as Father forever. And Jesus is starting this prayer, isn't he? He's starting this prayer by centering us on who God is to us. But the difficulty is that some of us, we don't have the best experience of mother or father. Some of us, we don't necessarily connect with God as Father, and it can be difficult. We can bring our human understanding about our parents into our relationship with God. And I just wanted to just acknowledge that to start with. I want to tell you a little story of me when I was young. I wish I knew how old I was, but I don't remember how old I was. But I can remember as a young child, when my dad came home from work, I can remember running down the stairs to greet him. And I'm like, Dad's home. I'm going to tell Dad about my day. And I didn't care whether or not I'd come through the door or what kind of day he'd had. I just wanted to tell my dad about my day. I've done this, I've done that, this happened, this is my drawing. Does anybody else connect with that? Particularly as parents, you're like, just let me get through the door, you know? And that enthusiasm of just kind of coming into my dad's presence. But I can remember a day when my dad said to me, Janet, when I come through the door at the end of a long, hard day's work, you need to wait. You need to let me take my coat off and let me put my briefcase down. You need to let me speak to your mum. You need to wait, and then you can tell me about your day. And my little childhood heart sank to my toes. I just felt crestfallen. And what I learnt that day, is what I learnt throughout my whole childhood probably, is that I had to change. I had to conform. I had to behave in a particular way before I could connect and communicate with my dad. And I don't think he intended for me to feel that way, but that's how I did. I had to be somebody. I had to be less me and be the person my dad wanted me to be before I could communicate with him. And the thing is, it's very easy to bring what we know, what we experience with our earthly fathers and mothers, what we experience there into our relationship with God. We bring those in without realizing. The good stuff and the bad stuff. Because God wanted our parents to be examples of who he is. But it didn't always work out that way because we're fallen people in need of healing ourselves. The way we view God affects everything about everything. The way we view God affects how we worship and who we worship. And so I have had to unlearn who God is. I've had to unlearn some of my experiences in order to understand who is this God. So I would encourage you to ask the Holy Spirit, who do I think you are, God? Ask God, how do I view you? And would you like me to view you differently? Do you need to do a work in my mind or a work in my heart to engage you and see who you are, that you might worship God and celebrate who God is. And God will take you on that journey. And if you want some help, then we are here to help you with that journey in small groups, in friendships. Please do ask for some support if you connect with anything that I've just said. Little resource that might be helpful is a book by John Mark Comer, God Has a Name. Really helpful. John Mark Comer talks about how we often worship a God that we've created, a God that we think he is. And he talks here about who God is based on what God says about himself. And there's a lovely chapter that talks about God as mother and father. And as a woman, I love any characteristic of God that I can connect with as a woman. So get hold of that if you'd like to journey more, or any books about God as Father. So how do we connect with God through worship? So what I wanted to do today was to talk primarily about sung worship, because we do it on a Sunday morning. It's like we spend a lot of time in sung worship. It's not the only way that we worship God. It isn't the only way. And so in small groups, you might want to look at some of the other ways that you can engage in rejoicing part of prayer. And there are some ideas on the video and in the book, so that's your homework for small group. But today I wanted to think about this sung worship. It says in Psalm 100, "Shout aloud to the Lord, all the people of the world. Worship the Lord with joy and come before him with celebrating." I think the version I've got on there is, "Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing." So that's our gateway, isn't it? Anna talked about pausing and waiting, like before you do anything, do nothing, last week. And so the next step is to come into his presence, to come into the presence of God with singing, making a noise. I mean, I don't really sing, I just make a noise, if I'm honest. So I've got a little quiz for you. This is a missing word little quiz. So all of those X's, they're not rude words, they're just a word. So what is it? What word describes stress relief? What word describes what can reduce stress and anxiety by releasing endorphins? I love an endorphin release. What helps your mood? What helps you feel happier and more relaxed? What improves your memory? What helps you to believe in yourself? What has physical health benefits? Improved lung function, deep breathing, the controlled use of muscles in the respiratory system. What can help you fight off illness? What can even increase your pain threshold and calm your heart rate, and when done together as a group, can give you a sense of belonging? There is one word that achieves all of this. Anybody want to shout out what it is? Anybody want to guess? Chocolate. I mean, I think chocolate might actually, I'm not sure about the deep breathing. I'm happy with chocolate, but actually it wasn't the answer I was looking for. Singing. Yay, singing. Do you know what I love about this? I love the fact that following Jesus is good for you. It's actually good for you. I mean, who knew, right? Well, actually, Jesus did, didn't he? Like, the things that God asks us to do contribute to our well-being. I think that's awesome. We worship God because he's God. But in that worship of God, in that singing, it's actually good for you. I love that. I just thought I'd share that with you for the fun of it. So if you've ever had a look at the Psalms, if you've ever read any of the Psalms, they were written by King David. He was described as a man after God's heart. I would love for God to describe me in that way. He was described as a man after God's heart, and he was a man of worship. He wrote hundreds of songs for the purpose of engaging the mind, the heart, and the body in worship. He knew that posture, outward posture, expresses an inward reality. That what we do with our bodies helps us to connect with God. That we worship God not just by singing, but as we worship God, we bring our whole bodies to God. And I think that probably some of the ways that people in the Old Testament worship God probably might have looked a little strange. Shouting, singing, clapping hands, dancing before God. In fact, I think there is a story about somebody who criticised and David dancing before God didn't end well for her. So I brought some pictures of different postures of how we can use our bodies in prayer. So we've got kneeling, sitting in a chair, standing, walking, lying prostrate. Prostrate, I think that's something altogether different. I think it's prostrate, or one or the other. No, maybe it's prostrate. I was right first time, I made it worse. Different, I hope your editing skills are good, Karen. Different ways of coming into the presence of God. So it says in 1 Timothy, I desire therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands. And then in Matthew, Jesus is praying and he falls down on his face. Elsewhere, we're encouraged to sing, to dance, to bring a joyful noise before the God. And I think there is something significant about how we use our bodies in worship. There is something significant. There is a way to connect with God that is that expression of the love that we've got for him. And so, here's your challenge for this week. Try a different posture in worship. Try a different posture. Doesn't have to be here. I mean, you can try a different posture here. You may never have raised your hands in worship. You may never have knelt. You can try it. You can just experiment with what happens with your relationship, your connection with God when you do things differently. That's why I always stand over there with the kids, because I can bounce about and dance and wave flags with the kids. And but this is a safe place. This is a place where we can worship together in whatever way we find comfortable. But you might want to just try this at home. You might want to kneel at home. You want to find a quiet space. We were sharing in the chat yesterday, weren't we, about our prayer chairs, like the spaces we go to pray, all these different places, they're wonderful. And so I would just challenge you, maybe even in your small groups, find a different posture, find a different way to rejoice before God and just see what happens. So we are going to move. I can't believe how fast I've gone through this. We are going to move into a time of worship. But I wanted to say two more things about this, how to worship, how to rejoice in God. The first one is when you read the Psalms, you find that David often says, awaken my soul. He speaks to himself. He says, bless the Lord, O my soul. He's telling himself to worship. And sometimes we have to do that. We have to tell ourselves to worship. Sometimes I'm a bit bored with prayer or worship. Sometimes I'm fed up. Sometimes I've had a row with somebody. Sometimes I'm just full of pain or I've had a really difficult week. And there is a command to ourselves that we choose to worship. And so we say to ourselves, awaken my soul. If I wait until I feel like worship, I will wait a long time. Sometimes we lack motivation, sometimes we're tired or grumpy, and in those times we bring God a sacrifice of praise. And I wonder whether if our worship to God isn't sacrificial, is it even worship? And so I wanted to start this time of worship. We're going to go into time of worship now. I wanted to start with a song that I've been listening to a lot. And it talks about that sacrifice of worship. It's a heartfelt hallelujah. And there are times when the hallelujah that we bring to God is hard to bring. And we need to worship then even more. Oh, I was meant to give you a nod. I'm nodding now. At those times, that's when we bring God our worship. And you know, some of us, we've had a tough time in life. Life isn't always easy, is it? And like the words of here is like, I've been to hell. You know, sometimes our lives can feel like hell. Sometimes our lives can feel really, really difficult. And we worship God even in those times, because in those times, those are the times when we sacrifice. And those are the times often when we get a breakthrough and when we see God as he really is. So we're going to sing this song. Are you... Yeah, you feel free to sit and just think and just come before God. Feel free to stand. I know it's a song you won't really know. It's quite easy to get quite easy to the what? The what? Pick up. Thank you. It's quite easy to pick up. So I'll pray, and then we can go into that. And then Rachel's going to lead us. So Father, thank you. Thank you, Ein Tad. Thank you that you are our Father. Lord, would you just take us on a journey where we worship you as you really are, where we honour and hallow your name as you really are. God, would you set us free that we might worship you? Would you help us, God, to find ways to connect with you through worship and build up that throne of worship? And so we just give you this time, we give you ourselves, and we say, God, would you bring the sacrifice we bring, and we say to our souls, rise up and worship God.